Hey, good afternoon. Thank you all for sticking around late on a Friday. I appreciate you sticking around to hear my updates. So excited to be here this afternoon and share what's going on in the Integrated Mobility Division at NCDOT, and kind of a lot of what you'll see is sort of programs we're working on related to our vision for the future and our goals to try to move us quickly towards that vision. So pretty high level, but certainly stick around. I'll stick around afterwards if you have questions on specific programs, and happy to follow up afterwards as well. As you all are keenly aware, the landscape of mobility is changing. You all know it better than anyone that this is occurring. I think NCDOT and some of the agencies that have traditionally focused on highways are also realizing that that's the case now. We have new modes emerging, new technologies emerging, more individuals in our population need other modes because of our growing elderly population, and also more people want choices and additional modes of transportation. So sure, we clearly are at a point in which we need to be addressing other modes and making sure that we're preparing for this changing landscape of mobility. So recognizing this, evolving landscape of mobility and the fact that there's always emerging new modes occurring, in 2019 we merged our Bike and Ped and Public Transit divisions to form the Integrated Mobility Division. Part of the goal being, again, to consider these new technologies, emerging innovations and emerging mobility trends, and making sure we're planning for those, making sure we're fully aware of those, and incorporating that in all of our activities and programs. And also just understanding that in many cases transit riders are also pedestrians and cyclists, and these modes in actuality function very closely together when we're planning for transportation. So those are some of the reasons why we merged. Here's the structure of our division. We have three core branches in our division: planning and programming. When we form the division, we want to have a increased focus and presence in the planning sphere. So we have a regional planning team that's brand new with our division. Brian Lopez is the manager of that team. There are 4 planners on that team, each of which have purview over a different part of the state. And we're just getting that team fully staffed, but once staffed, they'll be partnering with NPOs and RPOs, NCDOT division offices, transit agencies, other planning groups to form those relationships, ensure our goals and multimodal transportation are at the table and a key part of discussions at the local level. And then on the statewide planning and programming team, Joe Furstenberg leads that team, and that includes our Complete Streets program, our Safe Routes to School program, Bike Helmet Initiative, and many of our other statewide initiatives. Finance and administration, this is our individuals that administer grants and pay our bills and all the things that make our division function on a day-to-day basis. And then our innovations and data team, part of our new merged division is a focus on innovation. Again, like I mentioned, understanding that the landscape of mobility is changing, that we need to be at the forefront of these technology changes and help push innovations forward, collect lessons learned, and disseminate that broadly across the state. So we have just recently hired Sarah Searcy, which many of you may know from her time at ITRI. She will be coming on board with us November 29th as our manager of the Innovations and Data branch. Sarah is at ITRI currently. She has a bike and pedestrian background and manages the non-motorized volume data program at ITRI. So very excited to have her on board, and she'll be managing both innovations, and then data obviously is key to innovations because data helps us understand our gaps, and creative solutions and innovations help fill those gaps. So Sarah comes with a wealth of knowledge and research and data to help on that side as well. So at IMD, we have 3 core goals: increase access, basically eliminating transportation barriers for everyone, ensuring everyone in the state has equal access to opportunities and services; enhancing quality of life by ensuring that access and providing mobility choices for residents; and then ensuring safety regardless of the mode that someone takes to their destination. So regarding access, you all are probably very familiar with this issue. I think we heard some about it in the last session as well. In North Carolina, each dot here represents 20 individuals that live in a household without a vehicle or in a household where a vehicle is shared among multiple adults. And we estimate over 1 million individuals in the state are in this category. So it is a significant number. Over 10% of our population is in this category. And our goal at IMD is to make sure that as a department, DOT is considering these individuals equally with everyone else to make sure they have access to opportunities and services. In terms of quality of life, again, we've completed surveys in the past that show that 70% of North Carolinians said they would walk or bike if they had safe choices to do so. Also, clearly, if we can have safe infrastructure for people to walk and bike, more people walk and bike, medical expenses are reduced because medical outcomes improve, health outcomes improve. And then obviously, there's obvious benefits to VMT reduction and the subsequent greenhouse gas emission reduction and environmental benefits. All of that contributing to higher quality of life for our residents. In safety, we have seen an increase statewide in bicycle and pedestrian fatalities and serious injuries. A lot of this is due to the fact that more people have been walking and biking, but we haven't necessarily invested in the infrastructure to make our roads safer for that increase in activity. So you can see here, even most recently, the last few years, we continue to see an uptick in serious injuries and fatalities. So our goal at IMD is to partner across the state to implement policies and programs like Complete Streets to improve the safety of our roadways so that pedestrians and bicyclists have a safe environment. I did also want to just pause and mention a couple of items on equity too. I failed to mention this in the access slide as well, but a lot of what we do is to address equity issues as well. So in North Carolina, 60% of transit riders are people of color compared to 30% of the population. Average commute time by transit is 43 minutes compared to 23 minutes driving. So there's clearly a disparity there. And then in terms of safety, 55% of people involved, pedestrians and bikes involved in crashes are people of color compared to 30% of the population. So again, clearly there's an equity issue and a disparity there that makes this issue even more important for us to address. So to achieve those goals, we like to think about the future at IMD and try to implement programs that can get us to our vision for the future quickly. Envision a future in which transportation network users are accommodated safely, first and most importantly. Envision a future in which multimodal transportation options rival driving in terms of time, convenience, and cost. That's really what we're trying to get to when we talk about equal access, right? If you're in a part of the state and you don't have a car, equal access means that you could take a different mode and get to your destination in the same amount of time with the same cost and convenience. So that's what we're trying to achieve. And technology streamlines cross-jurisdictional trip coordination. Also, technology improves the way we can use multiple modes across one entire journey or one trip to get to our destination, again, addressing that time, convenience, and cost aspect. And technology can help improve safety as well. Land use and transportation planning are intertwined, and then ultimately all of this leads to residents being happier, healthier, and more likely to participate and succeed in the economy. So that's our vision, and that aligns with those three goals that I mentioned. Some of the examples that we're working on today to help us achieve that vision, a lot of, like I mentioned, our role and the reason we formed the innovations team is to think about that future, think about the technologies that will get us there quickly. We pilot those technologies, we collect lessons learned, and then we disseminate best practices so that we can deploy that more broadly across the state. Great example of that is our microtransit project in Wilson, North Carolina, that launched in September of last year. It launched during COVID-19, during the pandemic, replaced their fixed route bus service with these vans provided by VIA, a turnkey solution where they hire independent contractor drivers and provide the vehicles. Residents book the trip on an application, similar to how you would use Uber or Lyft, and it's completely subsidized by existing funding sources that they already had. And what we've seen is that ridership has doubled during the pandemic compared to pre-pandemic levels, and it really speaks to the fact that when you provide a high-quality service that makes using transit comparable in terms of convenience, time, and cost to driving, more people use it, and demand increases greatly because the people that were previously unserved or didn't view transit as a convenient option now view it as an option that they can use to get to work and other destinations. So it's been so successful. The map on the right shows many examples across the state of other communities exploring this service and exploring, and some of these actually have converted just in the last few weeks from planning to implementing. Wilmington in the bottom right, Wilmington, New Hanover, Pender, Brunswick counties just launched their service about 2 or 3 weeks ago. And in Morrisville, they launched their service in mid-October as well. You've probably heard about that around RTP. So this is an example of how we assisted a community with piloting and innovation. It was quickly successful, and then our work to disseminate that best practice has led to other communities quickly buying into the concept. I think when we think about the future, all of our communities across the state have some form of scheduling software for their transit provider. We think of the future as many of them shifting to this model of truly on-demand microtransit, and then all of it being linked together to form a statewide mobility as a service network, where anywhere in the state you could use the same application on your phone to book a trip, pay for a trip, plan your journey, and your bike share service would be connected, your scooter service might be connected. If you're taking Amtrak or intercity bus, it connects to the local transit system. So our vision is that at some point in a few years, we can facilitate having every mode connected within one application as a mobility as a service platform. But it starts with getting everyone having advanced technology like what we've produced in Wilson. We also are planning for a future with connected and autonomous vehicles through our CASI, Connected Autonomous Shuttle Supporting Innovation, that was most recently deployed at the Wright Brothers Memorial at Kitty Hawk. And again, our role is to partner with the private sector and with communities, or in this case, the National Park Service, to deploy an innovative new technology, to test it, collect lessons learned, research, and data. And that helps the private sector quickly make adjustments to address challenges in the field, and also helps us learn about the technology so we can plan for it. So CASI, extremely successful in the sense that we did collect a lot of lessons learned. There's a couple of crosswalks, for instance, if you've been to Wright Brothers Memorial, there's a couple of crosswalks that are most predominantly used by people to get up to the memorial. And the autonomous vehicles have a challenge right now with coordinating with pedestrians at crosswalks. So by default, they stop and wait indefinitely until the pedestrian is out of the way. So, whereas you as a human driver would interact with the pedestrian, make eye contact, and then you would know whether you proceed or not. Autonomous vehicles are not quite that advanced yet. So we discovered that through this pilot, and we also discovered that the sensors and having clarity around the sensors is extremely important. On one day, the grass had grown to be approximately 1 foot high, and it blocked some of the sensors, and CASI was not able to proceed on the mapped route. And so it was down that day until they mowed the grass. So it goes to show you that, yes, this is our future, but there's many steps before we get to autonomous vehicles being ubiquitous and reliable everywhere in the country. But our role is to test it and to discover those issues as quickly as we can, so we can help the private sector adjust, and that we can plan also our policies and standards around that. And of course, of great interest to all of you, we're working to accommodate all modes and providing mobility choices. We're still working to finalize our Great Trail State Plan, but you can see here a map of the trail network that was identified through our survey process that we conducted earlier this year. We have a very robust bike and pedestrian planning program with over 240 communities across the state having bike and pedestrian plans that we've led, and I have a slide here to show where those are located. And then, of course, we also lead our Complete Streets efforts. I was telling Terry before I came up that I was hoping to have some news to share on some advancements in our Complete Streets implementation approach today, but we're not quite ready for public release. But we have been working internally over the last few months at DOT to revamp how we implement Complete Streets, to get buy-in across the state, and to make sure integrated mobility divisions working closely with the highway divisions so that we have a unified voice and a unified culture and a supportive culture across the state with complete streets. So I feel like we've done a great job with that, and very soon you'll be hearing more about that. We also lead the bike helmet programs. These are just a couple of kind of side notes on our efforts to accommodate all road users. This year we had the most number of bike helmets distributed across the state, 11,600 helmets to nonprofit organizations across the state. So a very successful program. Hopefully you saw some press about this program in your community. Many of the nonprofits did have events and had press associated with their events. So it's an opportunity for us to engage with communities across the state and to allow nonprofits, police departments, fire departments to directly give out helmets to the children in their neighborhood and in their communities, so that everyone's advocating for safe biking and walking. And here you can see what I mentioned before, where our bike and pedestrian planning grants are located across the state. As I mentioned, 245 plans across 85 counties. And you can see here on the left the most recent grantees for 2021. What we're working to do is to expand our bike and pedestrian planning program to be truly multimodal, to include transit, include emerging modes, and to again address those core goals of increasing access, enhancing quality of life, and ensuring safety. So this just goes to show you, I know this is a lot on the slide, basically the takeaway is that there's a lot of different state, regional, local, and corridor level planning documents that are already being completed. Our goal at IMD is to help streamline and merge the planning process so that bike and pedestrian planning, multimodal planning is integrated seamlessly through those documents and potentially simplifying the complicated maze of planning that exists now, so that we're kind of navigating it at IMD and helping local partners navigate the planning process to ensure bike and ped planning is central. So look for changes. Again, we have our core bike and ped planning program that's been around for quite a while. We anticipate changes next year to that to incorporate the multimodal considerations, and also with our team of regional planners developing those partnerships across the state. You should recognize a difference in how we're engaged in the process as well. We're also planning for the future by working to link land use and transportation planning. The best example of this is our work on the S-Line rail corridor project. We received a grant from FTA for transit-oriented development along the S-Line. NCDOT is in negotiations with CSX to purchase the rail line, and our goal is to plan with these communities ways to optimize and leverage that rail service along this corridor and at these station areas to make sure land use is planned in such a way that maximizes access to the rail stations, to encourage economic growth if the community desires economic growth, or to encourage other land uses that support the rail and leverage the rail for positive benefits in those communities. But very much a collaborative approach, and we're working with each community to lead their own vision of what they anticipate for their community, and then we help them develop plans on how they implement that with land use changes and other investments. So again, key is our role to collaborate and partner, and we hope to increase and improve this role. These are the 4 regions that we've formed for our planners, and many of them are just getting onboarded, and so if you work for a planning group and you haven't heard from them, you likely will in the very near future. But again, we do hope to have a much greater role in collaborating and partnering at the local level in the future. And just a couple final slides on data. Of course, this is central to what we're doing and how we can achieve that vision that I mentioned. We're collecting a lot of data. We're trying to do a better job of combining the data. So we, for years, have collected non-motorized volume data through that program with ITRI. We collect data on transit agencies, bike and pedestrian crash data. We have a number of different data sources. Our goal is to do a better job linking it all together to tell a broad picture about access, equity, quality of life, and safety, and then use that to guide decisions on where we prioritize investments. But really, we need data to help us understand the problems we're solving. Again, using data to produce the map on access with the dots that I showed. That's one example of showing where the problems exist. We need data to understand where our assets, resources, and conditions are to help us solve the problems. Data helps us determine what our outputs are, what actions are we actually taking to address those problems, and then what are we achieving? Are we actually making headway in improving access for individuals that don't have a car across the state? And then where are we falling short? We still have a long way to go. We still have many gaps where many people still don't have a car and still have poor access in our state. So innovation is where we can look at those gaps and find creative solutions to those challenging problems that continue to persist, and using technology or other innovations to solve those problems. But it all starts with having the right data to identify the problems and understand where the gaps exist. So an example of new data that we're trying to develop and use effectively, this is a snapshot of a tool that we're working on at IMD to identify transportation disadvantage across the state. So you may have in your community, in certain urban areas, there are tools that exist to identify transportation disadvantage. We're trying to develop a tool that would be statewide. Every census block across the state would be mapped, and we would be able to provide that to planning groups across the state. This is just a snapshot showing several categories of transportation disadvantage, and Wake County, the scores that we've produced in this tool, showing the areas in dark green that have the most transportation disadvantage. So it helps us identify pockets of disadvantage so that we can prioritize our resources and investments and make better decisions with our funding. So with that, that's all I have this afternoon. But again, just to reiterate that we really appreciate the opportunity to be here with you all this afternoon. We want to be a partner, and we are working, I think, at NCDOT to recognize the emerging trends in mobility and the need to be more comprehensive and multimodal. I think that there is a huge shift occurring at DOT in that regard. So we welcome your partnership and work together on this issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Ron. Are you willing to maybe take one or two questions?
Certainly.
Yeah. We've got one question that came along online, and this is relating to what's happening in the governor's budget right now, of the $50 million allocation for the Great Trails State Plan to support that funding. The question comes from from Winston-Salem, and it says, does NCDOT continue to require that their substructure be engineered to the same standard as motor vehicle roadways? This can dramatically increase construction costs for greenways that are not intended to routinely accommodate much heavier traffic motor vehicles.
The short answer is I'm not sure about the technical question there on the substructure. I don't think that we would require the same substructure as a roadway. Typically, the highest cost when we're adding bike and pedestrian facilities is right-of-way acquisition. And our complete streets discussions that we've been having internally, we are looking at ways we can more quickly assess the cost impacts of adding bike and pedestrian elements on projects. And in our research on previous projects that have had those facilities added, you may be looking at a 4 or 5% increase. But if you have right-of-way acquisition, it could be 10, 15, 20% depending on the area of the state. So the materials is not the issue. It's usually right-of-way and utility impacts that would be the largest cost.
It felt like an engineering question, but thank you. Maybe one question from the audience. Go ahead, Deborah. So the question from the floor really comes from your data source for the census data associated with how many people have are living carless. And Deborah's related question is, do you bifurcate that information to indicate what the reasons are for that car-free living?
Yeah, so the data is primarily from the American Community Survey through the census. That would indicate zero-car households. We do have the ability, and I think we're working on this, to be able to correlate, so to speak, not to use a statistical term, but basically to correlate socioeconomic conditions with people living in zero-car households. But anecdotally, you would expect that people that have lower incomes are more likely to live in households without a car. I think that's pretty clear from the data that we've seen. We also, I would mention, we have another project I didn't mention with the Appalachian Regional Commission to quantify accessibility across the state. And that's a one-year project, but that will lead to a lot of analysis of the nexus between socioeconomic conditions and transportation disadvantage, using new data sources, combination of ACS data and other data sources to tease out in areas of the state that have higher poverty rates, does that lead to more people having living in households with fewer cars, and does that result in disadvantage? So I think that project will do a lot to help with those data sources.
One more round of applause for Ryan. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Lisa Regal with AARP North Carolina. We enjoy working with BikeWalkNC as we work to make our active transportation safer through efforts like the Bicycle Safety Quiz, Vision Zero, and Complete Streets.
At HDR, we're passionate about making North Carolina a better place to walk and roll. Our Salem Parkway project in Winston-Salem upgraded a downtown greenway, integrated a bike and pedestrian tunnel into a highway reconstruction project, and delivered 2 signature bridges. From planning to construction, we're ready to help you imagine, design, and deliver the next generation of bicycle and pedestrian projects for our communities.